Hello and welcome to another video. So today we're taking a look at an aggro sword deck. Of course this is an ambush buff sword variant of the aggro sword variants. There's also fairly similar card structure in the early games to a lot of the mid swords, you know, your goblins and your quick bladers and all those sort of cards that you want to be running and that sort of thing. But the top end really just kind of finished off at 5 and at 6 here with Card Council, although Card Council has been very iffy for me lately and something I would nearly consider dropping. I am running double round table even though we've only got the Princess Juliet that actually can be pulled off it, because having 2 of it just gives you that consistency to make sure you can pull it, which is great. Running 1, you run the risk of never pulling the card, which kind of sucks. Similar principle for Catha and White General. White General I just want a single one of because sometimes it's nice to have that 4 cost double boost that can target, whereas Bad is really only a 6 cost double boost if you've only got 1 follower, which isn't quite as good as White General. So in that regard it's nice to have 1 White General to work in while you're running 2 Catha as well. Of course the Kunoichi Masters are really big. Being able to play those, preemptively evolve, and then evolve the second one and get a massive amount of damage out of them is really important. Sky Commander Celia works great, especially a follow-up to the Kunoichi turn. Vanguard makes a good pre-Kunoichi turn on turn 4, especially with an Evo if you are going second, where you can really start to ramp those up. And the early game stuff is really just pressure and some good removal, with Riding Hood being probably the most lacking removal of all the cards in this deck so far. Really don't find this card as useful, probably going to change it out for something else in future, I'm not sure what yet. And Paradise Vanguard being pretty reasonable considering it is a banish. So we're going to get right into this and take a look. So first up is Portal. Again, Portal is very popular, it seems to be running around everywhere lately.
You must die. I bring unto you serenity.
We may cover another kind of Portal deck in the future, I just haven't decided where I want to go. We have covered our Endless Artifacts only a week ago-ish, something like that. But we will probably be looking at it again soon. So, Vanguard isn't too like, Vagabond Frog isn't bad, Angelic Knight is pretty good as well, and Sky Commander Celia actually works pretty nicely. I really like the Frog, mainly because it's just got a nice stat line to work with, and with the Evo really works in your favour. So we do get Katana Unsheathed, which is just Quick Blader, just alternate art, similar to a couple other cards. If you guys are wondering how you get it, it was a limited time promotion, and I don't believe it will probably ever come back, because Cygames doesn't tend to repeat promotions like that with the same rewards, so kind of had to be there to get it when it was first around. Unfortunately they don't come animated either, which kind of sucks. But we do get the damage to face, we are now 3 up, which is great. Of course, they get pretty much perfect card play there, being able to banish and remove this 2-1. But this does set up our Vagabond turn if we want to go with that, setting up for our 4-drop into a nice 5 into the Celia on 6. Which is basically ideal. The only thing better would be drawing another Quick Blader / Katana that I could play as a 1-drop, or even a Merman, or just anything of that sort that would make Celia have that little bit extra damage. Of course, Quick Blader being the best because it will actually gain us 1 extra damage on top. So we are going to get our damage from this Vagabond Frog next turn for 3, set up a nice Kunoichi Master, which is another 5, plus an Evo will guarantee us at least a couple more damage, whether we use it on the Sky or anything else. So we can really burst out a lot of damage with this.
I'll find myself out on the road.
Vagabond Frog is 3, next turn we have 8, plus the Celia for 6, which is exactly 14, I believe.
On a musical journey.
And actually, sorry, Celia will be higher because of due to Goblins, so it'll actually be up +1. No, sorry, with Goblin it will be 6. I gotta remember, sometimes I'm looking at these and I'm counting my followers, and as these turns move quite quickly in replays, sometimes I lose track of what number's what, but either way, I had planned it that we would have enough for at least lethal here with the Evo, so I wanted to guarantee having more than enough damage. So an Evo will actually take us to 8, which puts us well and truly ahead of that 6.
A torrent of chaos.
Portal didn't know what hit him in that game. Next up, Haven, presenting itself as still a pretty strong class in the current meta, doing pretty well with its Summit Haven decks. Our hand is nearly ideal. I mean, 1, 3, and 4 are all good drops. No real need to drop anything here. It'd be nice if we get a 2-drop to fill that gap. But outside of that, we're pretty happy with this hand. And Goblin isn't a bad option on 2 if that's all we have to play. If we do get another 1-drop, it becomes even better. But I would honestly settle for a Goblin on 2 if I have to. So there's Jeweled Priestess coming down for their cards. Not too surprising. Jeweled Priestess is probably the most common 2-drop play for Haven at the moment. So we're still getting our damage off, which is great, dealing just that little bit over time. All they can really do now is remove my board while I set up my Princess for 3 damage, Vagabond the turn after, and so on with Kunoichi, and maybe even Kappa for a nice amount of damage. So the main thing with this deck is really getting those turns going. If you can do a solid turn 4 through 6, that's where you'll usually win the games. If you do get dragged out, it's much harder to win. And if you get a really good hand and your opponent doesn't really play much, you can win earlier. But most of the time I find that turn 4 to 6 is extremely crucial.
I'll find myself. Time to settle down.
So I let my Vagabond to stay as is because I don't want the random damage or anything really hurting him too much. Of course, that's an absolute nightmare of a card. So I can pretty much ignore that. They're not going to get any healing out of it, which is good. I can pre-evolve my Kunoichi setup, which will give us a good amount of damage. We should actually be able to go for 9 damage off this Kunoichi Master total, with Vagabond getting 6 over the next 2 turns as well, so we're actually going to be at 15 damage just there before adding Kappa onto it next turn, which is going to be crazy. So with that, we're going to have a lot of damage total. And they can't heal because that's not going to do much good to them without using spells, and unfortunately they had no points left after playing that 4-6. So this does give us lethal.
Blessed by the heavens.
So there's our buff plus our Evo.
It all ends here.
So we get a nice 16 damage this turn. Absolutely crushing our opponent's face. The exact turns you want. A nice frog into Kunoichi. And the final match for this video is up against Rune. Depending on what kind of Rune deck you come up against, it can be sometimes awkward, but most aggressive decks beat out Rune pretty well. So we decided to drop all of these. They're all a little high. I really wanted to look for something a little earlier. Although Kunoichi is nice, since I had no early drops, I really needed to hard mulligan to get something good. Fortunately, Goblin, Princess, and Vanguard is great. And saying that in that order made it really confusing, but that's fine. So Goblin on turn 1. We don't have a turn 2 yet, which kind of feels bad, but we do have the Princess and the Vaga, which is actually going to do well. And that kind of makes up for it. Getting the Fallen really takes up that 2-drop slot nicely and lets us ping just that little bit extra damage to the face. So they go for the better trade they probably could have went for there, removing it, letting their owl stay up, going for probably a decent 2-for-1 trade on that. Being able to kill 2 followers with 1 is a reasonable amount of trade value for a follower. So there it is, nice little bit of damage. Dropping him to 16, setting our Vagabond up next turn, should be reasonable, especially going into an Angelic Knight turn.
I go where the wind takes me.
So I don't have much of another play outside of this. If I had have got my Kunoichi again into my hand, I could have at least played that, which would have been a really great play going up with the Kappa, but this will just have to be it. Now we're playing into the really hard game where wards are going to block us out from getting the damage we need. Fortunately, Angelic Knight is still going to be our buff. It just means now we kind of have to spend an Evo to remove this, but setting up a couple of Goblins gives Kappa more targets next turn to really get that damage. So the more we can keep up on this board now, the better. Of course, I do suspect to lose most of this, so it's a little disappointing. Yep, Nova Flare. Probably the best removal they could have had for this turn. And a Conjure Guardian. So we do get a Kanoichi Trainee, which is actually pretty good. It does mean that Katha has 2 targets next turn instead of 1, which means their buffs are going to be slightly better.
It all ends here.
And while our Angelic Knight is going to get rid of this 3-3, it does get to stay up as a 4-1, while getting us another 5 damage to the face. Problem now is, can we deal with more wards? If we can't, we're in a real tricky spot. If we can, we might actually be okay. So Golem Assault, again coming down, giving them another ward. Real nightmare to have to deal with. Fortunately, this Chimera at least isn't going to be removing anything, but that Evo does give us a tricky time. So our best situation would be to get a Quick Blader, and we do straight off the top. Quick Blader opens up the door for me to at least remove this 5-5. Of course, after looking at this, I probably could have done it a little bit better. I could have quite easily have just used the Katha first and then kind of worked it up there and come up with a different way to do this, but I think that still was probably the better route to go down. Getting 6 damage to the face pretty much secured us that victory. So I hope you guys did enjoy that video. If you want to check this deck out, the deck list will be in the description below. I gotta say, the most valuable players of this deck are definitely Frog, Kanoichi, and of course Katha, or basically anything else that can give you a decent buff that turn, whether it's Celia, whether it's the round table giving you an extra burst of damage, really help. But probably the 2 most valuable cards are Frog and Kanoichi. So if you did enjoy this video, hit a like button, subscribe. Again, you will find the deck list in the description below to check out this deck, and I'll catch you guys next time. See ya.